So here we go. This is another episode of the Uncivilized Art Podcast. I'm your host, Belmi Hazan, but I go by Bandit Haze in the online space. And today, my guest, actually, let me let you introduce yourself because I feel like I know your name, but you also use a
Yeah.
different name, and I don't want to maybe introduce the wrong name. So
All right. Okay. No,
yeah,
that's cool.
for people who
Yeah.
don't know who you are,
So
who is you?
doing right. So I'm like a low-level stand-up comedian, as in very, very low level. And my stage name that I use for comedy, and I also use on the internet, is Lance Carter. My real name, I'm not going to say it here because I kind of just want to
Okay,
keep
fair
Lance
enough, fair
Carter
enough. Yeah,
to my.
we'll leave that there.
But
It's just, as far as this goes, it's Lance Carter, Lance Carter.
yeah,
Let me say
yeah.
it right.
But
Lance or Lance, by the way. Sorry.
well, it depends because I'm from the north originally, and up there I grew up as Lance. But I've lived down here since I was in my early 20s, and down here I'm Lance, and
Lance.
my wife calls me Lance. So it depends who I'm speaking to. But no, the weird thing is, my real name, my real surname is it's kind of unique. So the combination of Lance and that, very easy to find me on the internet if you know it, which is kind of why I stopped using it because my kids are getting older into secondary
Yeah.
school. Their mates don't need to see me being a dickhead on the internet. So I
But
kind of
isn't
thought, but funnily enough, the name I use now, Lance Carter, it's actually my birth name.
okay.
I had an adopted dad when I was really little. I used his name pretty much all of my life. But when I was looking for a stage name and I just wanted something simple, fairly generic, I thought, hey, Carter. And it's actually my real name too. Bonus.
Awesome. Well, I feel like the whole point of having kids, and I ain't got no kids, but I feel like if I were to have kids, but literally the only reason to have kids would be so I can embarrass them one day. Like that, I feel like that's the
I mean,
best reason to have
yeah.
kids.
There is that, and I do that quite a lot. But I've elevated it to an art form. But there's kind of embarrassing them, and then there's their mates at school giving them a hard time because they saw their dad talking shit on the internet, and nobody needs that. That's just
Fair
cruel.
enough. Fair enough. Speaking of your name, though, I did see something you posted on Twitter. I think maybe last week or it was recently anyway. About your name and how you're not to give people the name Lance. And you're talking about various lances, and so I was looking into that. I actually searched the name, your name on the internet, Lance Carter, to see what comes up, to see if I could find any kind of famous cool lances. And I did find a guy whose name is Lance Carter or Lance Carter. He's an American guy, so he might be more Lance actually. But yeah,
Oh, I
he's
think they
a
go for
boss. Sorry,
Lance.
he was a what was he? He was a approach I have it in front of me, but yeah, he was a baseball player. Was it? He played
Okay,
baseball. And he currently teaches minor league, so he helps kids. So that's a cool person with your name, you
that's
know.
all right. Yeah,
I mean, he
yeah.
plays
It's
baseball, but apart from that, he sounds like a cool person.
It's all right. I grew up like in the 80s in Stockport, which is this. Stockport is this part of Manchester that's so shitty. Everybody just tries to pretend it's a completely separate town, and
Oh
it
right,
was
yeah.
just a grim place to grow up. And in the 80s, nobody was called Lance, so I'm this kid in the playground. With just, and you know what it's like in the playground. If you give the other kids any ammunition at all,
Hmm.
they're going to give you a hard time for it. And just having a weird name that nobody else had was just kind of like, it was gold dust for them. And the only, God, who can I, right, the only vaguely famous Lance back then in the 80s was this character on Home and Away called Lance, who
Home and
was
away, yeah,
just
yeah.
an absolute fucking dipshit. He was just like, his whole character was that he was just supposed to be this real dumb guy that got everything wrong and fucked everything up. And so, yeah, that's kind of the only role model and frame of reference I had for my name, which fucking sucked, I can tell you. Oh, I swear a lot. Sorry, is this
No, that's
okay?
cool. That's cool. You know what? My thing about this podcast is I want people to come on and just be themselves. So
Cool.
if that's swearing, no swearing, all in between, it's all good with me. So
Fair enough.
you,
And
you
then
know,
things only got worse when I got older because Lance Armstrong, for a while, I thought, brilliant.
oh
He's
right,
this
yeah, yeah, yeah,
incredible
yeah.
athlete. He's amazing. He's the best in the world at what he does. He's kind of got this byword for grit and determination. And then he turned out to be this massive cheating drug monkey. So
That was a
just killed it for me again.
bicycle guy, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. He
Yeah.
won the Tour de France like 3 times, I think. Um, and he overcame cancer, and he set up this foundation and everything, and he was a really good kind of impressive character. But then I think he got stripped of all of his medals because they found out he'd been doping.
Yeah, it was that blood. Yeah. I mean, I'm not so sure what blood doping is, but apparently you're not supposed to do it, and I guess it proves performance or something. But yeah, it was
Yeah.
I remember that guy though. I remember. Well, I never really. It's not like I followed bicycle stuff all that much, but you just remember like hearing about this person like Lance and he was doing all this cool stuff, and then all of a sudden it's like you see the name pop up in the news, and it's like it's not all good stuff anymore. It's like,
Yeah, suddenly his reputation was destroyed. It's like I needed that. I needed.
I don't remember. In fact, I'm sure you do remember this. I think we're similar sort of age.
Yeah, I'm
but
late 40s.
yeah, way back in. I think would have been like 80s, around about late 80s was the Olympics. There was a dude called Ben Johnson,
Yes.
from Canada, and I can't remember which race it was. It was 100 or 200 meters. It was one of the sprint races anyway. That he won, and I remember like it was like the coolest thing for me at the time. Like this guy, like he was so cool. He won. He was fast, super fast, and then the finding out he did drugs as well. It's like flipping out, man. So you can't have nothing.
Yeah, you can't. There was like I remember again when I was at school, they did this program where they sent athletes, famous athletes, to all these kind of crappy schools like mine to kind of motivate the kids. And just everybody who went to the Olympics for Team GB back then got sent to a school. And I can't even remember the bloke's name. It was some pole vaulter I'd never heard of, but he came to our school and he gave us this motivational speech about applying ourselves and trying to be the best that we can be. And then same deal a couple of years later, doping.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. You got athletes though. I mean, we got like policemen.
Got my eye on you fuckers.
Yeah. And one time we had the fire engine come around, and that's a story that not one of my proud moments, shall I say?
Go on.
So it was like myself and some friends. We had the bright idea to do a prank call on a fire station, and call it on the 999. Say there was a fire at the school. And they came round, and then it was all like, there's no fire. And then they came the next day saying, you don't do that. We don't know who it is, but it's not funny.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's stupid. It really is stupid. but that was
it's
that
just
whole
like
speech.
Yeah, that happened a lot where I live too. It's just a bit of excitement, wasn't it? The kids realised, if you just call this number, they'll send a fire engine, and it'll be cool.
Speaking of kids, actually, and things we did in school, I did want to talk to you about childhood video games and stuff because from following you on Twitter, we're both into video games, and I think you worked in video games industry at one time. So how did that start for you as a kid playing games? Was that something that you've always been into? Did you come into it later on? How did that work for you?
Oh God, I can't even remember. My earliest memory of video games is I had this auntie up in Manchester who I used to visit occasionally, and she bought this in the early 80s. It was like a Commodore VIC-20. It was the predecessor to the Commodore 64. It was the most basic, low-level, cheap 8-bit home computer you could buy. And she bought it because she thought it would be good for work and she could do professional stuff on it. And eventually she realized it was no good for any of that stuff. So she let me have it. And I just kind of, by the time I got it, it was already obsolete. All of my mates had ZX Spectrums and Commodore 64s and, all of those famous computers of the 80s. But I just became obsessed with it because it was all I had. So it came with a few games, and because it was already obsolete, you couldn't even buy games in the shops for it anymore. So I would buy computing magazines and get books from the library, and this is how you had to do it back then. You had to basically type in the code from the book to make the game.
Yeah.
And it was all just basic, and half the time it didn't work. You spent weeks trying to figure out why it didn't work. It was all because you missed like one comma or something off the code. But I just kind of, I loved it. I got really, really into it. And then I kind of got a better computer when I was a little bit older. And just like a lot of kids back then who became really geeky and got into ZX Spectrums and that kind of stuff, it just took over my life, and I loved it. And I kind of gravitated towards other kids that loved the same thing, and I'd play stuff like the biggest game I played, the one that I just loved, was Elite. I don't know if you remember that or you've heard of it.
I don't think so, but okay.
It was like a space exploration game, and what was kind of unique for it at the time was it was kind of like what we'd call now an open world, free
Right.
roaming. So
Okay.
you start off with this spaceship in a space station, and there's no storyline, there's no plot, there's nothing guiding you. It's just, here's your spaceship, here's a bit of money, the universe is yours, do what you want. And that was just mind blowing, because you had this freedom. You could go off and you could be a pirate, or you could be a miner, or a trader, or a bounty. You could just literally do whatever you wanted in this game without being kind of guided on rails like so many other games did. And that they managed to squeeze this whole universe into like a tiny, really low powered home computer in the 80s it was mind blowing to me. And looking back on it, it had these really basic wireframe graphics. It's really kind of slow animations and clunky, but I just loved it. I thought it was incredible. And the guy who invented it, a few years ago, he created a new version of that called Elite Dangerous, which it's on all the current platforms. It's on, PlayStation, Xbox, PC, and that's just astounding. Basically the same idea, but with modern graphics, and it's just unbelievable. I still kind of play that a lot. Anyway, sorry, rambling.
No,
That kind of
so
thing
good.
really,
So good.
that
So
shit really captured my imagination, and I just loved it. And I used to read a lot of these games magazines that you could buy back then. You probably remember, you'd walk into WH Smith's, and there was this big bank of like computing and video games magazines, loads and loads of them back then. And there were four people who had ZX Spectrums, and they were just funny. They kind of had all the games reviews and tips and all of this kind of stuff. But these magazines were funny. They had kind of in jokes and running jokes, and just the way they were written was a bit subversive and entertaining. It was kind of geeky, but it made you laugh as well. And it kind of made you feel like you were in a club almost, or in like this secret society of other people that were into this kind of niche hobby and shared the same kind of jokes and sense of humor as you. And just when I read those magazines, I just used to think, God, this must be great. Imagine that being your job, just kind of getting paid to play these games and take the piss and have a bit of fun and write these funny articles all the time. I'd love to do that. And by sheer dumb fucking luck, as it happened where I grew up in Stockport, there was a kind of small, low-level publishing company up there that they did some of these magazines. None of the famous ones that people, reminisce about, but they did some. And while I was in my final year of school, I got to do 2 weeks work experience with them. And then when I finished school, I kind of dropped out at 16, didn't really know what I was going to do. I was kind of twiddling my thumbs, and I thought, well, my dad was in the army, maybe I'll do that too. So I started going through the recruitment process and everything. And in the meantime, I kind of needed a job just to make some money, because I was skint. And this publisher advertised for an office junior, just, fetching, carrying this, that, and the other. So I kind of thought, oh, well, that'll do. They know me. They'll let me do that. And I kind of went and got that. And I was there for a couple of months, and they just said, look, do you want to have a tryout and maybe write a couple of articles for us? So I kind of did that. I wrote some reviews of software for one of the magazines. And that was it, really. After I did that, I kind of expected like the editor to come back and say, this is what you've done wrong. Nice try, but here's my corrections and everything. But they called me into the office. I'm like 16, 17 years old, maybe. And I don't know shit about shit. And I've got no idea what I'm going to do with my life. And they just sit me down and say, yeah, this is really good. Do you want to be a writer instead of an office junior? And that was kind of that, really, from the age of 17 through till I was probably in my early 30s. I just kind of wrote for video games magazines, and then evolved onto tech magazines, did more serious kind of business technology writing and stuff because it paid better when I got older. But it was just that one stupid little bit of dumb luck that I lived in the right place and I did work experience, ended up being a career in games journalism for, over a decade. To this day, I still can't believe I got that lucky. It was just fun. I spent all of my days just dicking around with funny guys who loved video games and loved making each other laugh and just having a really cool time with it. And I kind of miss it every day. It pays nothing though. That's the problem. You make no money out of that career, but you get all the video games you can eat. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's a shame actually. That sometimes the best jobs just pay too little, and it's like, damn it, you know. But if I'm
Yeah.
working this out correctly, I guess you would have been mostly doing the games journalism about sort of during the 90s ish,
Yeah.
2000s. Okay.
Yeah.
So what was the industry like then as a journalist writing for, because I guess would be things like maybe Super NES or PlayStation, like, you know, Super, no, obviously one, Mega Drive, N64. I'm guessing that's Dreamcast, that kind of era that you're writing in.
Yeah.
So what was
I
that?
pretty much covered PC gaming, but yeah, those were all the consoles that were out
Okay,
there.
okay.
It was cool because it was boom time. Back then, it was kind of the start of the home PC revolution. Because when I
Okay.
started in the early 90s, people didn't have PCs at home. Maybe like real geeks would have some of those old 8-bit computers like the Commodore, the Spectrum, or the BBC Micro, but nobody really had like PCs at home. They were kind of like this business machine, and maybe you had a couple of them in the office. But just as I started my career, that really kind of took off. They became more prevalent, and people just started using PCs at home more and more. And suddenly, you'd walk into Curry's and they'd have PCs for sale for home users and for consumers rather than, just for business uses. So it was boom time. There was a lot of money sloshing around. And what that meant for me as a young games journalist was you got to go on loads of jollies, loads of parties. There were always like if a company was doing a games launch, they'd have a big party, maybe in London. They'd book a really nice venue and just kind of ply you with booze and show you a good time just to launch their game or their new bit of hardware or whatever. And that went on pretty much from the early 90s right up until the dot-com bust in 2003, 2004. That whole period was just boom time for technology. And if you worked in technology media, you got spoiled so much. It was so fucking cool. Because remember, I'm just like this young guy, late teens, early 20s, and I'm from this council estate up in Stockport, so I've had a pretty boring life so far. And all of a sudden, I end up in London, and I'm getting wined and dined by PR agents and tech companies, and you're getting flown around the world to go to press conferences, and it was just mind blowing to me. And in my ignorance, I just thought, oh, okay, well, this just must be what life is like then. This is how the world works. And then, once I kind of got a little bit older and the dot-com bust kind of just destroyed everything and the internet kind of changed the whole model of games journalism and killed print publishing, then, you kind of get hit in the face with reality that, oh, okay, yeah, you're not special. You don't get to live like this. You were just lucky for a period. But I think you mentioned in your notes that you were asking about events, games industry events.
Yes, yeah.
And what was the one I used to go to? They used to run one in Islington, E3. That was it. I used to go to. Was it E3?
In Islington?
There was which one's E3? It's ages since I did this.
E3, as far as I'm aware, has only been in America.
Oh, okay. I've got
Um,
my wires crossed. There was one.
Islington. Oh,
They used to run one in the Islington Business Design Centre in Islington every year for the games industry. I've completely forgotten what it was called, but in the UK at the time, that was like the big UK games industry expo.
okay.
Got my wires crossed. I thought it was called E3, but maybe, yeah, you're probably right. That was the US one. Again, fun, big party, just lots of cool stuff going on. All the companies showing off their latest and greatest. But people had different attitudes about sexism back then. And they all had booth bunnies. They all had kind of
Yeah, I remember
girls
those. Yeah.
either wearing bikinis or dressed as like in skimpy game style armor. All of that stuff. I remember one. I can't even remember which company it was, but she was kind of dressed in a sort of skinny PVC outfit with a bullwhip, basically like a dominatrix. And she's just kind of parading outside the company's booth on the show hall of this expedition, just cracking this bullwhip. And all the guys are like, this is normal, this is okay. And nobody does that anymore, thankfully. But it was a different world.
Yeah, and I remember that actually because I remember going to the one game event. I don't remember what it was called as well because it was a long time ago. But it was one of these ones where you're only supposed to be able to get in if you work in the industry, and I
Yeah.
didn't. But I had a friend who was able to get us in by some dodgy tickets or something like some dodgy IDs or something like. But yeah, we all got in. And yeah, I remember the booth babes, and I would have been maybe like probably like late teens, early 20s, I think, at
Yeah.
the time we're going. So at that time, it's like, this is awesome. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like you got all these like girls around, and taking pictures and stuff, and so they're barely dressed, and you take them, they got their boobs rubbing against you. It's like it's the best thing ever, right? At that age. But yeah, certainly as you get older, you kind of think back of it. It's like, there's maybe that wasn't really such a good idea in the
I
long run.
I don't want to name the company because they're very big, they're very famous. A big software company. They've been around for years. They're still around. They're a big player in the creative industry. That's all I'll say. But they were notorious in the 90s for they'd throw amazing parties. And like I went to one, and most tech journalists are guys. There were a few women in the industry, but it was very sausage heavy environment. And what these guys did for their Christmas party was they just hired a bunch of models, like really good looking girls, excuse me, and got them kind of dressed up as angels. So they had like little skimpy outfits on with big angel wings, high heels. They just spent the night kind of parading around, handing out drinks, cigarettes. This was how long ago it was. You could still smoke indoors. Like they were walking around with trays of cigarettes and stuff, and just handing out drinks and freebies and stuff. And every year they would do that. They'd have these amazing parties. But also they used to run an annual press conference trip for all the journalists in Europe. And they pick a really cool city like Dublin was one, Prague was another, probably a few others. I can't remember. It was a long time ago. And they pick all of their favorite journalists, fly them to this city, book you into a hotel for a week, ostensibly to do some press conferences and go on a business trip. But really, you'd spend like maybe one day or half a day at press conferences talking about their latest products and their releases and stuff, interviewing executives. For the rest of that week, it was just a jolly. It was just eating, drinking, being wined and dined, having a great time. And like I say, in my young, naive 23-year-old mind, I just assumed this was just how the business world worked. I didn't realize that I just lucked into this unusual time in the tech industry, and I was being very, very spoiled.
Mm. What do you would say what changed for you then in terms of like you mentioned like realizing that you kind of lucked into it to you got like the internet coming in and changed everything. I guess you're maturing yourself and seeing the world differently. Or I mean, what is it that you feel like led you to say, you know what, enough's enough. I've done games, I've done tech. It's time to walk away from this.
What happened? So it was 2003. I had spent 3 years working on Internet Magazine, which kind of, it wrote about the whole dot-com boom. Back when websites were kind of new and exciting and people were still kind of, spending a lot of money in that whole area. I was the reviews editor on that magazine. I'd been doing it for 3 years, and I kind of enjoyed it. It paid better than some of the other magazines, and I was kind of interested in the topic. Social media was just becoming a thing as well. Like people were starting to talk about blogs, that sort of stuff, and this idea that websites was something that didn't just belong to powerful companies or media organizations, but anybody could build a website if you could use a blogging platform, something like that. That was kind of a new idea, but it was just starting to take place, and it was kind of interesting. But so what happened then was my best mate. He was doing like IT in the city. So he was kind of same age as me, mid-20s, but he'd kind of he came from Manchester as well, and he'd kind of lucked out, got himself a job doing IT support at this hedge fund in the city of London because he was a geek too, knew how computers worked. And they were throwing loads and loads of money at him, but it was like a really high stress environment. And he did that for a few years. But he just kind of had a bit of a meltdown because it was all way too much for him. And he was like, you know what, screw this, I'm out. I'm going to go and travel the world. And he kind of went off traveling. And then in 2003, he said to me, hey, mate, I'm going to go to Australia for my next trip. Do you fancy coming too? Because you basically, if you're under 30, certainly back then, you could get a 1-year visa to go to Australia and just kind of, work your way around, hang out there, have a good time. But you can only do that if you're under 30. And we were sort of heading towards our late 20s at that point. So he's like, if you want to come with me, you've got to do it now or it's not going to happen. So I thought, okay, yeah, that sounds cool. So I said to my boss, look, I want to take a kind of sabbatical. I've been doing this career now for, I think it was close to 10 years back then. I think I need a break. I just want to go backpacking for a bit. And so I did that with my mate. It went from just being a trip to Australia to this epic. We flew into Russia. We kind of backpacked across Russia into China, Mongolia, then, a few other countries, and then on to Australia for a year. Had a wild time. And while I was doing that, my publisher said, look, if you want, you can still write a column for the magazine once a month and we'll pay you for that. So I was kind of making a little bit of money. I'd just go into an internet cafe, write my column for the month and, earn a couple of £100 that way, which again, that shows you how long ago it was. You could get paid a couple of £100 just for writing a 500-word column for a tech magazine. That would not fly today. Anyway, did that. My year was up in Australia, came back, expecting just to slot back into my old job on the magazine. What happened in the meantime was the dot-com bust. So the magazine that I worked on went from earning something like £1 million a month in advertising revenue to less than 100,000 a month in advertising revenue. It was just this really sharp decline. It crashed almost overnight. And I don't know if you remember, I think you might be a bit younger than me, but the dot-com bust, everything just kind of went sideways. It wiped out a lot of businesses, especially in the tech space. My publisher just said, look, we can't afford to bring you back on. The magazine only survived for like another 6 months or something. Then it went bust. So I kind of suddenly found it was quite hard to get back into the tech publishing industry because that boom time that I'd kind of been enjoying, unaware that it was boom time, suddenly kind of turned into a massive bust. And all the print magazines went under, but it was still too early in the days of the internet for people to figure out that you can actually make quite a lot of money from content on the internet if you know how. We all just thought, oh, well, that's it. People don't pay for websites. How the fuck are we going to make money out of doing this? We can't. So we all kind of had to go off and get other jobs. And luckily for me, because I've been writing about social media and, the rise of these kind of new, interesting kind of services that let anybody publish a website or build a blog or whatever, it kind of coincided with the public relations industry getting obsessed with social media and thinking, social media is going to be the next big marketing boom. So because I had experience in the media and I kind of knew social media quite well, I just kind of pivoted and ended up working in public relations agencies, being like a social media guy.
Okay. That's interesting. Yeah. So like, I guess for yourself it was, well, I guess not quite your choice, but you were able to do something, I guess, climbing related to what you were doing before. Okay.
Yeah, at the time it felt kind of like, crap, I don't really want to do this. Like, I quite like being a writer, but you know what, it's it's a lot more lucrative, and I've got kids at a house now, so it's yeah, it pays the bills.
So you still playing video games when you can? Because I think you did post about, was it not Dark Souls? What's the other one? Elden Ring?
Elden Ring, yeah, I kind of played that a little bit. I need to go back to it. Yeah, I play a lot. It's I'm in quite a geeky household as it happens because my kids are all into video games. My wife, interestingly, she's kind of not what you'd call an old school gamer. She's not like a geek girl or anything like that. She's actually a nurse, but occasionally she sees something and she gets kind of interested in it and she wants to give it a go. And like now she has just started playing Skyrim, literally 10 years behind everybody else. What happened was
started small then, just
yeah. Well, my kids have all got Nintendo Switches, and she kind of watches them playing, and she saw one of them playing Zelda, what is it, Breath of the Wild, I
Right. Yeah.
think.
Yeah. Yeah. Breath of the Wild.
And
Yeah.
she got really into it. So she just played the whole of Breath of the Wild herself on one of the kids' Switches, completed that. And now she's like, oh, bored. I need something else. So I kind of thought, well, look, if you liked Breath of the Wild, why don't we dig out? I've got a PS4 that I don't really use anymore. So I dug that out. I said, look, you're going to love Skyrim. It's kind of like Zelda, but a bit more sort of, a bit more dark fantasy kind of thing. So she's kind of, at the moment, as of about 2 weeks ago, she's now just fucking obsessed with Skyrim. That's all she wants to do. I play all sorts now. I've kind of, what happened in lockdown was a couple of my old mates from Manchester, well, three of them, said, hey, we've not seen you for ages. And by the way, we've got this kind of weekly Warzone game going. Do you want to join in? And I love that because it just got me back into regularly playing video games. So now, because of those 2 years when we couldn't really go out, 2 or 3 nights a week, I just kind of jump on with my boys from up north. And we had our squad going. We got really into, just playing Warzone every other night. But that's because Warzone's kind of got a bit old now. We've started playing other games and trying other things. And it just kind of got me back into the habit of playing regularly. And I'm loving it. I got... Have you seen the SteamDeck?
Yes. I do want one of those. I probably have no use for it, but I still want one.
Oh, I got on the waiting list at the start of the year and I finally got it about a month ago. Absolutely love it because what's happened, I had my first kid about 11, 12 years ago. What happened then was I kind of had less and less time to game. But I still kind of liked the idea of gaming. So I'd buy PC games when they were on sale thinking, oh, well, yeah, I like that. I'll play that. And I wouldn't feel too bad because it was only like a £5 because it was on sale. Thinking, well, look, even if I don't play it much, it's not cost me that much money. So I built up this whole library of really cool games over the past 10 years that I just never found the time to play because, I work all day at a computer. I've got a wife, I've got kids. I can't spend every evening just sitting in front of my computer gaming as well. So it just kind of never happened. The Steam Deck is fantastic. It's basically all of those games that I've amassed over the past 10 years. I can now play them on this thing. And I don't know what it is, because it's kind of the same as just sitting on the sofa with a laptop. But because it's a bit smaller and it's a handheld, it feels less antisocial. So like when it's the evening, my wife will be watching some reality bollocks on TV and I'll be on the sofa just kind of having a little gaming session. But it kind of, we're not ignoring each other. We're not in separate rooms, just, geeking out. It's really cool. It's kind of it's given me a way to kind of casually game without feeling like I'm neglecting my family.
Yeah, and I don't even think about that factor, because I don't even know how many games I've got in my Steam library, but yeah, a lot of them I haven't played. Many of them I haven't even downloaded. It's kind of bought, whether on sale or got some, I don't know, codes that gave you some free games or something, and they're just there. So yeah, that could be a lot to get through once I finally
I've been waiting for
Deck.
years to have a proper go of The Witcher 3
Oh
because
yes,
it looked
yes.
amazing. And I bought it in a sale probably about 3 years ago. Game of the Year edition with all the DLCs and everything. And I thought, this looks epic. I finished Skyrim. This looks like the next thing I should get obsessed with. And it just sat in my Steam library untouched. But now I've got it on my Steam Deck. I kind of, I play an hour or two of it most days. It's cool. Love it.
Yeah, what I liked about The Witcher 3, when it's been some years ago now, but when I was playing it, same sort of thing, I wasn't able to play it like, every day. I'd play like maybe an hour here, an hour there, and that sort of thing. Sometimes it'd be like weeks in between, sessions.
Yeah.
But what I liked about The Witcher 3, and I don't know if this is done deliberately or whether it's just by some magic happenstance or whatever, but even though I played that game maybe over a 3-4 month period or something like that, at no point did I feel lost in the story. It has a really cool way of keeping you up with what you need to do with that. Because sometimes, you come back to a game, you haven't played it for maybe a week or two, you're kind of like, what the hell am I even doing? It's
you've
like
got to remember the controls and figure out what the story was. And
Witcher 3, when I was playing it, it didn't seem like that. So yeah, that was a good one. That's a good one.
Yeah. Have you seen the show as well?
I have not, no.
It's cool. It's really good. Loved it. And I'm kind of lucky like that because my wife, as I said, she's not what you'd call a geek girl, but she'll happily watch stuff like Game of Thrones, The Witcher, sci-fi too. So we kind of share that sort of stuff. But no, the TV show's great, and I recently got all of the books because the whole thing is based on this series of books
Right.
by
Yeah.
this Polish author, and they were on sale on Amazon, like a quid for this entire series. I think of about 6 or 7 Witcher novels. And I thought, well, the game's cool and the TV show's cool, so the books are going to be great. And I really like to get into a nice meaty series. And I'm kind of struggling with it. I'm a little bit disappointed. I don't know what it is. It's just not working for me. I might have to
Yeah.
stick with the TV show.
I did read one of the books actually. I don't remember which one, Blood something or other. I forget. But
Blood of
apparent
Elves, was it?
that could be it. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I was under the impression that was the first book, but apparently it's not the first book, or
Yeah, that's
the
the problem.
order of their release is not
Chronologically,
quite the
they're in a
order. Yeah.
yeah, like the first one is actually the second chronologically in the series. Um, I don't know why he released them like that. And also, I kind of went into it not realizing that the first 2 books are they're actually short stories. It's
Yeah.
I didn't realize that, so I was sort of reading it, and it didn't feel very cohesive to me
Yeah.
because it kind of kept jumping around, and I didn't realize I was reading a collection of short stories rather than one sort of long
Yeah.
novel. Okay, that explains things. But
Yeah.
maybe I
Definitely.
should go back and give it another go.
Yeah, and I definitely did feel like that when I was reading it as well. I mean, I'm not sure if the Blood and Elves is a collection of short stories or if that was an actual book, but I know there were some that were short stories, and yeah, the story it definitely did feel like when I was reading it that it starts somewhere that's not quite the beginning, and it feels like it assumes that you know what's already happened, and
Yeah, yeah.
I guess if
I'm
you've
too
read them
old
more,
for
then it's
that.
cool. But yeah,
It's happening so much in TV shows and books now. I don't know why everybody feels the need to make stories really complicated. And
mm,
I don't know whether my brain is just kind of shriveling with age and I can't follow difficult plot lines anymore, or I don't know.
yeah, it could be. I mean, I think I'll get them there as well. It's like, I mean, because here's the thing, the MC, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's like
Yeah,
I've so far been able to keep up with all the movies and TV shows. I think maybe just 1 or 2 that I might have missed, but I've kept up pretty good with it. I feel like, but even still, I'm kind of like there's a point where I don't know how much I could keep doing this. And as much as I love
yeah,
it, I'm very invested in it. There's so much right now. There's just so much right now. And there's things happening where I'm forgetting what happened in that movie from that time ago, or they make a reference to some obscure thing that happened in this episode of it, and I'm just kind of there like watching
yeah.
it like, oh yeah, that, and you kind of have to be reminded. And I find myself going online and on IG, and they might say, well, this is why they said that. It's like, oh yeah, because of that. So yeah, it's getting a bit much. It's I don't
I
know. I
kind
mean,
of
I
like
like it,
completely lose
but
track of all the MCU stuff. I liked the earlier ones they did, like the first Iron Man. I rewatched that recently before they were trying to cater to sort of a more family friendly audience. The first Iron Man's kind of hardcore. I sat down and watched it with the kids for the first time a couple of years ago, forgetting that it's actually quite an adult film. Like
it's
I don't know, there's like really violent bits at the
yeah, like
start.
it gets
Then he,
blown up out the sky,
yeah,
and things all
and there's
crash. The whole
when he
prison
gets on the
scene.
plane home, when he escapes from the cave, his captors, and he gets on the plane home, he's got lap dancers on the plane with him. Like half, I'm watching this with like my 8-year-old son, thinking, "Oh crap, my wife's gonna kill me." But yeah, some of the old early ones they did when they were trying to be a bit more edgy, I kind of liked them. But then they realized, oh, this can be a really huge thing if we just kind of tone it down, make it family friendly. There are just so many of them, and a lot of them are so generic.
Mm.
But I've been loving She-Hulk: Attorney at Law. Thought
Okay,
that was really good.
have
Have you
you
seen it?
watched all? I have. Have you
Yeah, we
all
watched the
of it?
final episode last night.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool,
yeah, I
cool.
loved
Yeah,
the whole meta angle. That was breaking the fourth wall. That kind of made me think, oh, okay, maybe there is something in the MCU that I can get on board with. But
yeah.
yeah, I
She
kind of lost
Hulk.
interest in most of it.
I thought She Hulk kind of turned out rightly, and I did feel like when it started. it was kind of I'm not sure about this one. It seems a bit slow, seems a bit boring. I'm not sure if it knows what it's doing, but yeah, I feel like sticking with it. And certainly by maybe episode 4, 5, 6 or so is where I felt it started to get more interesting. And certainly by the time it ends and it gets very kind of the whole mess of it within itself, I thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
And the last episode, I watched that yesterday or the day. Well, I watched it recent. Well, yeah, it only just
Yeah.
came out. Yeah, it would have been yesterday because it came out yesterday, wasn't it? I remember watching that, and when it started going into this whole thing where she's coming out of the show and then talking to, oh, by the way,
Yeah.
spoilers real quick, coming out of the show and then talking to, like, Kevin, Kevin, and I was kind of thinking, okay, this is going to be either really bad or really good.
They kind of made it work though, didn't they?
Yeah, but they did all right with it. I think they did okay, and then finally when it ends with Hulk and introducing his son, and it's like, oh, okay, this is yeah. And
Yeah.
apparently that's the whole thing within itself. I just saw an IGN, 'cause, again, only things explained to me, but yeah, apparently that the whole thing with his son is like there's this. I mean, it's probably gonna be different for the movies, I'm sure, but it's pretty tragic. It's pretty tragic. So we'll see how much that gets incorporated. But yeah.
Yeah, I watched it with my kids, and they all like that stuff. But my eldest one, he's 12. He's like the real super geek of my kids, and he knows everything. He knows the MCU inside out. He's kind of young enough to remember all these storylines. And oh yeah, that guy knows that guy, and this is how it all ties together. But I don't think he'd ever seen anything quite like that, where they sort of really played around with the meta and broke the fourth wall and all of that. And just watching his reaction to it was, it being the first time he'd ever really experienced something like that, he was just giggling his little ass off. He thought it was the best thing he'd ever seen. It was very cool.
Yeah, no, I actually, yeah, I did end up enjoying She-Hulk. I mean, overall, yeah, it was definitely. Actually, speaking of She-Hulk, actually, because that got a little bit of controversy. So, and we did speak about Booth Babes a little while ago. So,
Yeah.
let me ask you what you thought about this, because one of the scenes in the first episode where she becomes She-Hulk. Bruce takes her to the island thing, and he's talking to her about how to be a Hulk and giving her all these advice and stuff like that. And then they have the kind of blow up kind of argument where she was saying that what's she saying? She feels that she doesn't need to go through all this training stuff because she's already an expert at handling her emotions, because she does it infinitely more times than you.
Oh, like that. That's a woman's daily existence or something.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Yeah.
What was your take on that, or do you have a take on that? Maybe.
It made me laugh. I thought it was a clever line. I'm a married man, so I know all about female rage. I don't know that I have an opinion other than I just thought, okay, it's an interesting angle. I kind of get that.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that's kind of my thoughts as well, because like, I mean, I would say that I felt like the way they did it was perhaps a bit clunky, because the words she uses was, "I do this infinitely more than you," and that's where it becomes like comparing her life to Bruce's life, and then now you're comparing trauma, and it's kind of into, well, I kind of feel like I mean, if we're going to talk about this in a productive way, which, I mean, I'm not sure if that's Marvel trying to do, to be honest, I'm not sure. But if we are going to talk about it in a productive way, then the whole idea of trying to compare one person's trauma to another person's trauma is where it gets like detrimental, because everybody experiences life differently, how I might see things and how you might see things and how things feel to me and how things feel to you is like, we've had different lives and different experiences, different things that inform us into how we internalize that all. But it got some comments on the internet.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what I liked about the final episode, though. Like, they had that whole scene with like all the incel guys going like this deep dive into all of that, and again, it's kind of taking this meta view of the whole thing. That made me laugh. I mean, maybe I'm not thinking about it enough, but ultimately, it's a comic book TV show. I don't really think that it's very productive, kind of trying to read too much into it.
No, certainly, and that's kind of one of the things about it, where it's like, how seriously do you take something? Like when you're watching a show, you know, it's based on a comic. It's mostly made in, at least from ostensibly being made just for fun and to put something out there. And sure, they're gonna have messaging, and there's nothing wrong with that. So when these things come along, it's like, do I take this as a serious point and really try to analyze what they mean by it, or do I just take it as face value, as just a comment somebody made on the show that, yeah, maybe a little bit clunky, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, that's I was never a massive comic book guy. I kind of liked Spider-Man growing up, and I'd say I'm kind of adjacent to it all. I was never really into it, but there is this whole point, isn't there, about they might seem like silly sci-fi, but most of the best superhero books
Mm,
are about something. Like Spider-Man is this young geeky boy who has problems in his life, and he gets these superpowers. But of course, he realizes even if you've got superpowers, you still got problems. They can't solve everything. And the Hulk is obviously, it's all about the original version. It's all about a man with anger issues, and
yeah.
how something a lot of guys struggle with is anger issues. I've never been one of those guys. I think I'm quite calm and measured, but I get that a lot of blokes kind of have this issue controlling their tempers. But I guess that's kind of the interesting angle, isn't it? Because, okay, people know that's what the Hulk's about. People know the Hulk is really this kind of story about anger issues, and how, this man kind of struggles to control the beast within. And the new angle is these people, whoever made the news show, going, well, okay, yeah, fine, that's a point. But, you think women don't have anger issues too? You think they don't have these things they kind of wrestle with in their lives? So, I guess it's a fair point, and it's an interesting new angle. But like I said, it's just fun, isn't it? Well, certainly I wouldn't try to read too much into it because I'm not smart enough.
Well, speaking of comics, well, you are a comic. You do stand up comedy. How did you start with that? Like, you went
Yeah.
from the games industry to writing in tech to standing in front of people and telling jokes. Like, how did
Uh,
that come about?
it all kind of leads on, to be honest, because like I mentioned, when I was writing on games magazines especially, the idea was that you kind of had to make them funny, you had to make them entertaining. You can I see a lot of games websites these days, they're quite clinical, and they're quite, um, it's almost like critiquing an art form. They take it very seriously, and I get that. Yeah, there's kind of merit to that. But kind of back then, we were just kind of taking the piss a little bit. Games were supposed to be fun, reviews were fun, and the point was, you can tell people about the game, whether it's good or bad, but you can also entertain them while you're doing that. And I think one of the reasons I was reasonably successful at that was that I was quite good at kind of writing funny stuff and writing funny articles. But it never would have occurred to me that I could kind of apply that to, like, doing any kind of comedy performance. It was just, I was writing about something I loved with a sense of humor. Then, I kind of pivoted careers into the PR industry and marketing and what I do now. And I didn't get to be funny anymore in my day job because, when you're marketing stuff, there's no real place for that. And I kind of missed that. But what also happened in that shift was I became less of an introvert. So I always used to be happy just hiding behind my computer, writing my articles, playing my games. That was kind of my my comfort space. What do you call it? My comfort zone. Yeah, that's where I was happiest. But then when I got into this career, I kind of had to go and speak at conferences and stuff, and I had to kind of go out and do presentations and talk to people about social media, things like that. And to begin with, I was just horrified that I might have to do that. It was my idea of hell. But I actually got quite into it, and I got quite good at it, and I quite enjoyed it. And after a while, the kind of two things clicked, and I thought, oh, you know what? I kind of miss being creative and being funny. I don't get to do that in my job anymore. But now that I'm actually a bit more confident at speaking and going up in front of people, maybe stand-up's a thing I could do. And I'd always been a fan, but it never really occurred to me that that may be something I could do, because I didn't really think, what would I even talk about? What kind of routine would I have? And I know the guy's name is Mud now, but I remember years ago watching a Louis C.K. routine when he was talking about
right, yeah.
yeah. And a lot of, when I had kids, all the guys I know who had kids talked about how it's the best thing in the world. It's magical. You'll love it. It'll change your life. And, you know, anybody who's had kids knows that's not really true. It's hard. It's difficult. It changes your life, and not always in good ways. You know, of course you love your kids, but it's hard work, and it can be quite soul destroying. And there's a lot of kind of, there's kind of a negative side to it, shall I say, especially in the dark days when they're all really little and you're juggling babies and you feel like you have no life. Louis C.K. did this routine where he was talking honestly about being a father of young kids and about how just awful it was and how he just really hated doing it. And it just clicked with me. Yes, he's speaking my language. I get it. And I wouldn't say I kind of immediately went out and just copied Louis C.K.'s routine, but it made me think, you know what? I've thought of jokes in my head about how horrible being a dad is and how horrible being a parent of young children is. And I kind of started writing a routine about that. And I kind of got started just by doing that, going to open mic nights and kind of doing jokes about kind of how awful being a parent is. But the joke was always that, you know, it's my problem. It's not my kid's problem. I'm a terrible person because I'm thinking these thoughts, you know. And then, that was probably 2017 when I got started. Just, 5-minute open mic spots all around London. And my kind of, once I got started doing it, loved it, got completely addicted to it, like a lot of people do. And I kind of found my stage feet, kind of got a bit better at it. And I moved on from just bitching about my kids to doing, other material, different things, just kind of life in general. And I've kind of reached the point now where I'm not a club comic. It's still kind of a hobby for me. I'm very much what I'd call a comedy industry bottom feeder. I get low-level paid gigs at bar shows and things like that. That's where, like your local pub will have a comedy night once a month, and they won't get people with TV credits, or they might not even get people who are doing the club circuit. They'll get kind of one level down, people of my kind of level of experience, kind of doing it. I love it. It's fun. It's 10 years ago, I would never have imagined that I'd be doing comedy at all. So I'm just kind of enjoying being on the scene,
Yeah. You mentioned something about when you said jokes about your kids, and you said that the joke was always about how it's your problem and not their problem.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's quite interesting, because I feel like there's a lot of comedians that kind of miss that nuance where, especially when you go around on the open mic scene, like everybody wants to be edgy, everybody wants to be, do the offensive humor, but they don't necessarily think about where the joke actually lands. And what you end up with is something that sounds more like a person just standing and insulting people for 5 minutes, rather than, okay, there's where the joke is,
Yeah, you get that a lot at the very, when people are very early on as open micers. I go to 1 or 2 open mic nights a week. I've probably done about 200 since I started. So, you kind of see people come and go. And I've been guilty of it. A lot of guys especially are guilty of it. You want to be, you want to be an edgelord. You want to go out there and do sort of really offensive humor. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, or I'm not saying I don't like that kind of humor, because I do. I really like kind of, dark, edgy material.
Some of the best jokes out there. So.
Yeah, exactly. But it's something that you need to be really skilled before you can do it well. It's not something you should be doing when you're just starting. You go to an open mic night, you've got 5 minutes to kind of convince these people that you're funny. And you see these, especially the younger guys, they just kind of go out there and they do 5 minutes of pedo jokes. And it's not original. You're not good enough to pull it off. It just doesn't work. And like I say, I've been guilty of it myself. Okay, I've got this routine, and it's all based on a true story. When we had my middle kid, when he was just a little baby, he was only a few months old. We went round to our local friend's house. They're people we know that had kids at the same time as us, so we've kind of gone through it all together with them. They're a Nigerian family, and they were having a barbecue, and they had a bunch of people around from their church. So we're there with our brand new baby, and of course all the mamas from the church are there, and everyone's kind of passing the baby around, giving them a little cuddle. Now, the reason I mentioned it's a Nigerian family is because what happened was our baby would cry whenever a black woman picked him up.
Okay.
It was, but it was kind of it was obvious that he was doing it. Whenever a black woman picked him up to give him a cuddle, he cried. A white woman, he was fine. And it was cringing because, we could all, but of course we know what was going on. He was just a little baby. He'd grown up in a white household and he'd only seen white faces up to that point. And his first experience of a person who looked different to his mum and dad was scary and confusing. He's a 3-month-old baby. And of course he grew out of it. But it kind of struck me, even though it was embarrassing and cringy at the time, it's kind of funny as well. Because, there's the famous Nelson Mandela quote, "No child is born hating another human being because of the color of their skin." Well, actually, mine was. It kind of seemed to come out. And I made a bit of a routine about that, about having a racist baby. And in my head, this was kind of funny because my friends found it funny and the Nigerian family found it funny. So I thought, this is okay. I can do this on stage. And no, I could not. I did that bit a few times in its original form. I can't even remember how it went, but it was all about having like a racist baby, and this idea that babies aren't born racist is a lie, because obviously they are. But it kept landing really badly. It worked 1 or 2 times, but I was at a club. It's in Greenwich. It's called Up the Creek, and they do a gong show. Yeah, and if people don't know what a gong show is, you basically, you get 5 minutes, but the audience can boo you off if they want. Yeah. And the aim of the game is you've got to survive 5 minutes and then you win. But if the audience don't like you, you just have to leave the stage. And I got to 4 minutes and I was thinking, yes, this is great. I'm doing really well. Nobody's held a red card up yet, so I'm all good. I'm down to my final minute. I'll close with my really cool racist baby joke. And as soon as I got halfway through it, and the whole audience just went, "Nah, off you go, son." They weren't having it. And the guy who went up after me was just like, "What the fuck was wrong with that guy?" And the audience kind of clapped him. And I was just like, "Oh, crap, this is not what I was aiming for at all. This isn't what I was going for." So I kind of shelved it for a long time. And then I went back to it more recently, now that I'm kind of 3 or 4 years in, with a bit more experience and a bit more, I don't know, skill. And I kind of rewrote it, and I came up with a new way of telling the joke. And now it works. Now it just seems to work every time. Same story, but just, I don't know, angled differently. And that's kind of the point. I'm saying, if you want to do edgy or stuff about contentious topics like racism, sexism, whatever, maybe leave that till you've got a little bit of experience and you kind of know what you're doing. Then it becomes a little bit easier.
Yeah, no, certainly. I feel like how you tell a joke, how you introduce the joke, all that little sort of stuff is going to play into how the joke is received. I did, like I say before, I did a little bit of stand up, and one of the lessons I learned was kind of had to learn quickly. Really, is that especially if you're doing an open mic, they don't know you. So they don't know if you're a racist person. They don't know if you're a sexist person. They don't know if you secretly hate this, hate that, if you love these things. They don't know anything about you. And certain words can be triggering, and if you're not saying it in a way where you've maybe given them a chance to maybe know who you are or know how it's coming, or, or whatever it may be, and they just hear that word, it could be that you haven't even told the joke yet, and you've already turned the audience off.
Yeah. Well, two things helped me. One, and this is really important. This is something I've struggled with, and I've kind of realised that you need to get good at if you're going to get anywhere with comedy. Is you need a level of self-awareness to understand what the audience sees when you walk out on stage. Because I just think I'm silly old Lance telling some funny jokes, nice, amiable, fun guy. And somebody pointed out to me, you kind of, some people might think you sort of look a bit Brexity. You look a bit like, you might well be a right winger, like a far right guy. Because, I shaved my head, I've got a beard, all of that. And, I guess some people might have that at first glance. That's what they might take away. They might look at it. The other thing that helped me was, so I kind of started thinking, okay, yeah, I've got to understand how I see myself isn't necessarily how other people see me.
Yeah.
The other thing was, there's a professional stand-up called Lenny Sherman, he's a funny guy. I've seen him a few times, and he was performing at a show that I was on, and had a great night, really good gig, went well for me. And he came up to me after the show, and he's like, "Look, I'll give you a bit of advice. You've got a lot of dark humor, which is great, and it worked well for you. It will work better for you if you warm them up with something a bit softer and gentler. So just tell a nice, easy joke that's accessible, non-offensive, that get them on side, show them that you can be funny without being a bit full on, and then you'll have won them over. You've kind of then earned the right to go and do the darker material, the edgier material. And he was absolutely right. So now I try and start off with something just a bit silly and, non-contentious, and ease my way into sort of some of the slightly more contentious topics that I might cover.
So with some of the more contentious topics, I believe you have a few things to say about the UK government. So I've seen I've seen your tweets, quite a few.
I don't know if I have anything to say. Like, I don't have the answers. I'm not. I'm not a political genius. I don't know how to run the country. But oh my god, fucking these guys! They're obviously transparently terrible. They just fucking suck at what they do. They're the worst. And to me, it's obvious that the Conservative Party are just fucking awful. And they either, have you ever heard the phrase, never attribute to malice that which can be adequately explained by incompetence? So don't assume somebody's being horrible. They might just be stupid.
Right. I mean, I don't know the phrase, but yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember who wrote it, but it's never attribute to malice what can adequately be explained by incompetence. With the fucking Tories, it's both. They're malicious and they're incompetent. And to me, it just seems obvious that they're terrible at their jobs. They're either in it to enrich themselves, or they've just got really stupid ideologies that don't work and shit on the most vulnerable people in society. I see that myself with crystal clarity, and it frustrates me that other people can't. Like, I'm now kind of, getting into middle aged. I've got a lot of friends who are my age, and, a lot of people, they kind of get more right wing as they get older. I find myself going the other way, and I don't really know why. I don't know why I've gone that way, and a lot of my friends have gone the other way. But like all the stuff that's going on today, like the Chancellor, I don't know when you're putting this out, but today is the day that the Chancellor got fired after like a week or something in the job because he's crashed the economy incredibly quickly. And my mates, God love them, who are all kind of getting a bit old and right wing, they're all in the chat, and all it is from them is, it would have been worse under Corbyn, or, well, people realise if we get a Labour government, it won't be all. And the conversation isn't about how terrible these guys are and what a fucking awful job they're doing. All they want to talk about is everything else. Everybody else is to blame except the government. And I just, how can you not see this? it's a weird thing that kind of happens as you get older. Like one of my closest best friends from school, I'm lucky that I've got some very close old friends I've known since childhood, and we're still good mates. Even so, one of them is like a full-on Trumper. He loves Trump, and he's convinced the guy was a political genius, and he could do no wrong. And I do not get how you look at Trump and not see what I see. It drives me mad. I don't want to rant about politics.
No.
I will give myself a heart attack.
I think there's a lot to be said about that whole thing. But yeah, I mean, I'm somebody who tries not to follow politics a great deal. And certainly, I wasn't, as a kid following it. I pretty much ignored it the whole time. It's only maybe in recent years where it's become so difficult to ignore because it's just in the news and on the Twitter feed so much and never anything good. And you just, like you say, like, how do people not see this, and it's what's sad is that, and hopefully this isn't the case, but as you say, the people getting old and getting more right wing, and you kind of see that as well, and I hope that they don't get voted in again, but it's kind of hard to,
who the hell knows?
You know what I mean? It's just like how do people not? But
yeah.
You said something interesting about you becoming sort of more leaning more left, and as your friends becoming more right. You're not sure why that happens. I think I might know, and this isn't any kind of like professional assessment.
Yeah,
this is just how I've observed things in my own life and some of the things around me. I think I know a possible reason why that might be, and I think it's to do with expressing creativity. People who are expressive or creative in various ways tend to be people that you're looking at the world more, you're thinking about things different, especially if you're doing comedy. You're not just looking at the normal ways that people think about things. You're actively trying to think about things differently because you're looking for where the humor is, and I think that plays into a parts of how we inform ourselves in our thinking and in our lives. Certainly when I think about most of the creative people that I know, they tend to be more, I mean, to be fair, there are a few, but most of the creative people I know tend to be sort of more liberal, left-leaning, some very left-leaning. Whereas, right-wing people tend not to express that side of themselves so much. And there is a balance to be struck between the two philosophies, I feel. I don't think we are at that balance, but I do think there is a balance to be struck between the two philosophies. But I think that possibly, and like I say, I ain't no professional psychologist guy. I'm just somebody that sees things and goes, "No, that sounds about right," But yeah, possibly.
Yeah, it is interesting. Like most of the comics that I know are pretty left wing. Look, some guys are doing quite well out of right wing comedy, and it's kind of interesting to me because there's a big sort of argument, there's another bollocks culture war thing about there's not enough right wing comedy. It's like, well, the reason there's not enough right wing comedy isn't because right wing comics are silenced or shut out of the industry. Certainly not as far as I know, anyway. It's just that it's really hard to make that shit funny. And I think if you can make right wing comedy work, fucking good for you. You're a genius. Some like Andrew Doyle, I will tip my hat to, and I don't even think that he's that right wing, but I think he sells himself as a right leaning comedian, and he's really good. I like him. I believe he's still got a pretty decent career, so he's not being shut out of the industry. And there are kind of a few others as well. But then I think there are some comedians, like old school guys, who are used to doing old school working men club style 80s, 70s style comedy, who think they're being shut out of the industry. But really, it's just because they're old and they're not funny anymore,
Yeah.
And even some of those guys, they're still touring and still making money out of nostalgia, out of people who love them from back in the 80s. So, right wing comedy is a thing. It does exist. It's just a really hard thing to do, because the whole rule, the golden rule in comedy is everybody knows you don't punch down, and it's kind of hard not to punch down when you're doing right wing comedy, because the victims tend to be minorities, vulnerable people, or the poor. So I mean, if you can make it funny, good for you. But I think people struggle with that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, no, certainly, and I think when you consider like if you're the butt of the joke, it's not impossible to laugh. I mean, certainly there's a funny joke's a funny joke, but let's say you're talking to an audience, most of them are probably going to be on the poorer end of the spectrum,
Yeah.
not necessarily in poverty, but and most likely not going to be like the middle class and upwards when you go to like your average open mic gig. So if you do a whole bunch of jokes about how poor people are lazy, might not go down so well. You know what I
Well,
mean?
exactly. Yeah.
Consider the audience. But yeah, like you say, if you can make it funny, if you could find a way to make that in a way that maybe it comes at them at some way they weren't expecting or whatever it may be, and cool. But if not, and I guess a lot of people can't, and so you
Yeah.
just
I
don't hear it
mean,
so
I
much.
genuinely think, if somebody could kind of make good right wing comedy, then that guy's a genius, and he deserves to succeed. They deserve to succeed, but
Yeah,
they're few and far between.
yeah.
Although, I know of some comics who are kind of my contemporaries, so people who sort of started at about the same time and were about the same level as me, and they've kind of pivoted to doing podcasts and stuff, and they've kind of become free speech warriors, so
Mm.
kind of leaning to the right of the culture war, and it's worked out nicely for them. They've kind of got big audiences, and their careers are booming because of it. So I don't know, what am I saying? I'm just saying, don't tell me that right wing voices are silenced in comedy, because they're not.
There is a joke you mentioned about punching down that I find funny, and it's one of these jokes that I know I shouldn't laugh at, but it is I can't it makes me laugh, and it's by Ricky Gervais where he says yeah, you should never punch down unless you're beating up a disabled kid, and it's so stupid,
Yeah, it
right?
is.
And of course, don't beat up disabled. Well, don't beat up anybody. But of course, but it's just like the way it's delivered, the way it's said, and the imagery of this guy just Ricky Tracy punching down some
Yeah,
disabled is like it's a silly joke, but yeah,
I mean,
it gets a chuckle.
it's a good joke, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. Ricky Gervais is one of those guys that really divides people, and I'm kind of, I don't know. I think he's done some really good stuff, and he's done some not so good stuff. I
Mm.
kind of, who am I to have an opinion about Ricky Gervais? Like, this globally successful British comedian, it's, I'm sure he's kind of sat at his computer waiting to find out what Lance, the low-level open mic guy from London, thinks about him.
Oh, you never know, right? I mean, in the realms of
Yeah.
possibilities. Well, speaking of that, actually, who would you say is a really good comedian that not enough people know about?
Oh right. Oh man, what's the guy's name? He's a Scottish guy. He's got a couple of Netflix specials. He seems to be much bigger in the States than he is here. Oh shit, I'm gonna have to Google him. Sorry, his name's gone. Give me 2 seconds.
Sure, no
Uh,
problem. I'll just keep the audience entertained for the moment. Do, 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 do,
Scottish comedian,
do,
Netflix.
do, 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 do,
It's okay, we're good.
do, do.
Daniel Sloss.
Sorry, Daniel Sloss?
Daniel Sloss.
Daniel Sloss.
Daniel Sloss.
Okay, Daniel Sloss.
Yeah,
That's one to
I
look
mean,
up.
saying that not enough people know about him. He's got a couple of specials on Netflix, so he's kind of got a career. He's got a profile, but I don't think he's as big in the UK as he is in America. Exactly my kind of humor, really dark, but handled tactfully and interestingly. And he throws in some real kind of left field punchlines, and he takes it in directions that you're just not expecting. Yeah. Lower down. We okay?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna make a note. Daniel Sloss. Sorry, but yeah, Carol, so
Cool.
lower down.
Lower down, kind of more at my level, or I think he's gigging a lot more than me, and he's probably getting better gigs than I am at this time. Is a guy on the London scene called Stephen Catling, who
Stephen Caston.
Yeah,
Okay.
he's just surreal, bonkers, completely out there. I'm not one for whimsy and that kind of, super surreal comedy usually. I think it's had its day, but Stephen's just kind of doing really interesting things. Um,
You know what?
oh man,
I just searched Stephen Catling, and the first result is a serial killer from America. I'm guessing
oh
that's not who
wow.
you're talking about. I'm guessing that's not the
No,
one
no,
you're
no.
talking about.
When we're finished, I'll send you some links to their stuff.
Cool, cool.
Um, oh shit! And hold on, the other guy is Nick something, who does this weird kind of meta deconstructing comedy. Hold on, let me find his name for you. Nicholas Everett. So his surname is EVERRITT. I guarantee you have not seen anything like this guy. He's very interesting and alternative. Um, he's got an interesting stage persona, which is good. Although having known the guy for a couple of years, I hesitate to say it's a stage persona. I think it's just who he is. But he does this really interesting thing of just kind of deconstructing well-worn comedy tropes and kind of taking apart the whole way that you think about stand-up comedy. He's very cool. I think you're going to see a lot of him in the coming years. He's starting to kind of get a lot more visibility too. Right.
Okay, cool.
I'm going to have to go in a minute. I think we've probably got like a couple of minutes. So if
um,
there's anything we've not
you
covered,
know what? I was actually just thinking that this could be a good place to wind it down. So cool. So yeah, we just got a few recommendations. Awesome. And yeah, I was thinking
I
this
feel
could be a
like I
good
should
place
throw
to.
a lady in there too, because that's like three blokes. It's going to make me look awful.
Okay, sure.
Uh,
Let's throw a woman in there because that's.
right, a couple of recommendations. Catherine Mather, Northern girl. She's brilliant. She just makes me laugh so much. And I have to mention Sakisa Bostwick Barnes.
Oh, I know her actually. Yeah, yes, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, she was great. She kind of emceed and helped run one of the big open mic nights in London for a long time.
yeah.
She was really lovely to me and quite supportive when I was just getting started. And she's getting on TV and stuff now, so she's going gangbusters. And she's great. She's larger than life, good stage presence, very funny. Love her.
Yeah, and I've seen her. I met her a few times. I'm pretty sure she doesn't remember me, but yeah, she was hosting the Comedy Virgins.
Yes, yeah, that's
I
where I
don't know if
met
she
her.
still
Yeah,
does it, but yeah, that's where I met her. Okay, so yeah, we've got fun recommendations. And yes, I feel like that could be a good place to start winding down. But before we go,
fantastic.
was there anything else you'd like to say, mention, before we before we go?
No, I did just a caveat. Don't take any of my comments about politics to heart because I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just old and angry. Don't cancel me. No, like I've got a career worth cancelling. How arrogant of
No,
me.
they'll dig us up in about 10 years and be like, "Remember when you said this?"
Uh, if I get anywhere in 10 years, I'll just be grateful. No, thanks for having me. It's been fun. I don't really do a lot of these
Awesome.
things. Oh,
Appreciate.
no, I've got one thing I should say.
Oh
I
yes.
don't know where you live in London. I am starting my own open mic night
Okay.
in a couple of weeks, Tuesday nights at Bar Malden in New Malden, southwest London.
Oh right.
I
Yeah. Yeah.
know
Yeah.
some of the guys involved in running the place. They wanted to get a comedy night going, so they've asked me to set it up for them. So I'm currently booking, and I'm going to be emceeing that every Tuesday night.
Okay. Is that starting soon, or was that starting?
First Thursday of November. Sorry, first Tuesday of November. Then every
First
Tuesday after that.
first Tuesday of November. Okay. So what we know? Okay. Well, a couple of weeks then. A couple of weeks. Okay. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
pretty soon. Okay. Cool. So new comedy night coming. Awesome. Uh, Lance. Lance. Let me say it properly. Lance.
Lots.
Thank you for coming on. Appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. But yeah, I'll let you know when the podcast is out and all that kind of stuff. But
Cool.
yeah, thank you for sitting down, chatting with me, talking about all kinds of cool stuff. Thank you. Big up to you. Big up to everything you do. To the people listening and or watching, thank you. And till whenever, if ever.
Cool.
Peace.
Cheers, Haze. See ya.